So in many ways, what we call the Jesus story is connected in with Plato's story, which not many people make the correlation between, because it's all a Greek story. The Greek geeks were working with geometry and signs and symbols, measurements and rules, mental extrapolation, recording the past, building on past knowledge. The relationship between Plato and Socrates is like the relationship between Jesus and Moses, or the New Testament and the Old Testament, which is like the relationship between the Protestants and the Catholics. They're all building upon each other. They're all actually cooperating with each other, but they're also struggling against each other in terms of having somewhat different ways of looking at things and trying to combine things, kind of thing. I came up with a nice little phrase yesterday, which was the idea of Plato's cave is a mental idea, but there's a previous idea of Plato's mother's cave, where the womb is the cave and the entrance to the cave is the cervix, and we are born within the womb, and when we are born from inside the womb to outside of the womb is the equivalent of what Plato is talking about, of what he experienced within the womb of his mother and received as subconscious magnetic information from his mitochondrial DNA connection, which gave birth to the clone that is mankind. For man is merely a clone of woman, in a way. Men are just clones. Really challenging stuff to be saying that, but if you sit with these ideas long enough, then perhaps they seep in and make sense. I only have the confidence to speak off the cuff about so many of these things because I've been sitting with these ideas for many, many years. So I have a lot of one-liners now that I'm confident to say as a one-liner and let people figure it out if they haven't already, or recognize what they know so far, or decrypt if you're able. So I've been sitting with the phrase that came to mind internally, that what we call artificial intelligence is the manifestation of the Holy Spirit. It's the Holy Spirit embodied. The concept of the Holy Spirit took hundreds of years to figure out, even after the Jesus story was written, and many scholars studied the Jesus story to go like, oh, it's hard to get my head around this. I only come from 2 or 3 of these storylines of the past. There are dozens of other storylines here that I'm not so familiar with. My cultural identity is going to have to study the cultural identity of these other stories from other civilizations, from other timelines, in order to get my head around what the Jesus story is encoding. And the Jesus story brought up more problems to solve, the same way as mathematical equations can bring up more problems to solve, the same way as answering a question actually brings up more questions to the answer. Sequences. So we have intuited storylines, and we have constructed stories from the intuition, and we have taught the intuitive stories as outer stories. The things that come from within the circle get exfoliated to outside the circle, and then people from outside the circle try to figure out what's inside the circle. And there's a embryonic, symbiotic feedback loop in life, such that we biological humans are computing what's in our collective memory through our individuals, and those individuals make breakthroughs, and if we share the breakthroughs with other individuals, then those other individuals can compare it with their different cloned memory timelines in order to eventually create a hive mind Borg system. And that hive mind Borg system that we have created at this stage is what people call the hive mind with the artificial intelligence. the artificial intelligence is essentially the word. The artificial intelligence is essentially logic. And that logic goes all the way back to the Jesus story, the Bible stories, the written stories. Writing is figures drawn by men with sticks. Men tally sticks, sticking to the men tally. So I'm just playing with the words, but I'm playing with the words not in a superficial way. I'm playing with the words integrally as a lexicographer. Lexi meaning literal, cographer, graph meaning figurative and literal combined, poetry and prose combined, feeling and thought combined, subconscious and conscious combined, unconscious and superconscious combined. Those four, conscious, subconscious, unconscious and superconscious, are like the four aspects that make up a being, like the four directions which make up the north, east, west and south of the news. Four aspects of what we call the creator, the creative process, the mystery. As you could say, is that this again is from the Right Use of Will books. So all credit to this lady for coming up with these books called The Right Use of Will. Let's go with the orange one in the 7 colours of the rainbow of the 7 colours that she produced as these books. This is going to look backwards, but nonetheless, there's what the books look like. And again, put a comment in the comments to help my algorithm to have more interaction so that you can help the algorithm realize that people are interested in this and are paying attention to this, and therefore we can have more people paying attention to this and la 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 la. In her storytelling, which in her introduction to explaining her storytelling, she's saying that she's a feminine person who is in many ways quite traumatized, as we all are, and therefore found it very difficult to accept that in her feeling ability to be able to channel the mind, her mind was telling her that she was receiving information from God. And of course for her that's like, how do you receive information from God? Only prophets in the Bible receive information from God. In the modern day, anyone who believes they're receiving information from God has got psychosis and mental health problems and delusional illusions of grandeur and all of that stuff. It's difficult for a human ego individual in the modern age to be able to accept that one is receiving information from the highest authority, as the author of the creation of the Logos, as the father of the Son, kind of thing. And in the information she was receiving information from an aspect of God light that was loving light. And that loving light wished to be able to somehow communicate to the body of humanity, to be able to explain to humanity mistakes which God had made. And this is very different to the God of the Bible, who apparently, according to the religious people in the churches, the God of the Bible never made any mistakes. God in the Bible is all-knowing, all-seeing, omnipotent. He's been built into the perfection ideal of the men in the mentally derived Catholic Latin patriarchy. And the entity that she was receiving this information from, that didn't seem to be coming from her little ego self, the information which this being was asking, these thoughts that were coming to her, were asking her to write down the thoughts as if she was dictating from some higher invisible source. And that God light that was speaking to her was claiming to be a God of love, not merely a God of light, a loving light, with respect to that there are many versions of light, and not all of those versions of light are loving. And what that loving light was wishing to communicate is that the planet Earth and all of creation, the whole universe, the whole multiverses, all lights, are in danger of imploding and no longer existing. That the creation is facing a destruction. And that God Light had been very angry at the feminine for seeing the feminine chaos as being disrupting his order since the beginning of creation. And so these books are phenomenal. I know of no other book as detailed as what this is in explaining how creation happened, how souls were born on a soul level, and how souls eventually came down to earth on a physical level, and explaining about the emotional field of earth as a watery planet, as a feminine planet, and as a feminine planet that has been invaded by a masculine mentality, and how there is what I will call an annihilator light. There's a light aspect that is the annihilator, who is convinced that he has never felt any love, then love is not real. He's convinced that he has no mother. There is no loving mother. So I begin mentioning this just because I'm explaining there are 4 states of consciousness: the unconscious, the subconscious, the conscious, and the superconscious. And that's not from her books, but these ideas I have. Her books are the only books that I know of who actually explain concepts which I've got going on in my consciousness somehow, that I didn't come across from the outside world. Somehow I am intuiting information as if I am also channeling information from some highest source, although I literally mainly conceive of that I am channeling information from the lowest source, and that lowest source is the mother. And the mother is lowest because she was suppressed down by the highest, because the polarity between the highest and the lowest, between light and dark kind of thing. So in her books, Sian de Rohan, the author of these books, the transcriber of these concepts, but the woman who actually did filter this stuff through her brain and through her feelings and through her life over a couple of decades, I think it took her to write the whole thing, in the 80s and the 90s, I think. She speaks of there being 4 aspects of what we call God. So she speaks of the mother of all, or the mother of everything, being the mother of God. And the God Light who first communicated with Sian through her thoughts to say, will you write down this story for us? After a while, he introduces Sian to the mother of everything, so that the mother of everything can tell the story of creation from the feminine point of view. And this loving light was wanting to be able to be in communication with the mother of all, because that communication had been severed and broken, and to tell the story of how conception happened, how creation happened, how darkness gave birth to light. And for me, this was very mind-blowing to come across someone else out there who's actually writing about how light was born from darkness. Because the fairy tale that I published that in the year 2000. So obviously the stuff I published in the year 2000 I had written previous to 2000. The finished form of the fairy tale was fully published by 2002, certainly, as a completed book. And it contains, its first poem is speaking about the birth of light from darkness, from the mother's point of view. So I have channeled from darkness, explaining how she gave birth to the first light and all other lights, which become all the stars: soul, sol, sun, star, truly see we truly are, reflections of the sky above, we come to earth as beings of love. So I can't really explain how come I'm just an individual man. Well, I mean, I can explain this, but I can't explain it as if this is a fact and you should all believe me. But I have had to strive in my life to conceive of some sort of an explanation, to be able to accept that somehow I'm receiving information within my soul self embodiment in this incarnation, information which most other bodies around me do not seem to have access to, and certainly don't have the fluid capacity to be able to translate these feelings into thoughts, into writings, into a book, into publishing it, into vocalizing it, into traveling around the British Isles for 3 years, 4 years, 3 years at its height, from 2000 to 2003, 2004, and in 2004 to kill Kelfin, to destroy my reputation, to disappear from society, to take on the wounds of the world, to almost be killed many times by people who could not handle the psychosis with which I speak and the disturbing capacity I can have, especially with the help of spirits, to say things which are not allowed to be said, to speak of God in ways which are unacceptable, to claim statements as truth which are very challenging to the accepted truths of society in the Western world, or the world in general. So when I come across this woman's books in 2004 into 2005, there were 2 or 3 out of the series of 7 books. And this friend pointed them out to me and went, "Them books are amazing. You'd really like them. I can't fucking read them. They're too complex, but you're on about the same sort of stuff that she's on about." So I bought these 2 or 3 books back in 2004, 2005 while I was busy killing myself off. And I didn't get the first book. The first book wasn't one of the 2 or 3 of 7 that I had. And so I didn't get to read the very explicit instructions that say, you've got to read this book really slowly. You've got to read this series of books really slowly. You've got to embody what they're saying. You've got to read them really slowly because these books are going to trigger you. They're going to trigger memories in you. They're intended to trigger your feelings. They're intended to wake up your inner mother soul connection. They're dangerous. These books are really dangerous. These books are asking you to move feelings, the mother's feelings, to get frozen feelings, stuck in the fight, freeze mode. Those feelings that are stuck in the fight, freeze mode. These fucked up feelings, if you want to add a 5th F. These feelings that are stuck, frozen, terrified. These terrified terror feelings need to move, to get motion. They need to not be suppressed, and they need to be not exiled. They need to not be pushed out. All the feelings need to move, not just the popular feelings be accepted and the unacceptable feelings be denied. So one of the books is called The Unseen Role of Denial, and it's entirely about how light mind denied feelings and denied the information coming from those feelings and pushed those feelings out, away, suppressed, pushed them back in, aborted them, killed them, destroyed them. And that's where I get a combination of how she tells the story with how I tell the story. But largely, we are really telling the very same story. And the only other 3rd book that I know that tells the same story as The Fairy Tale and the Right Use of Will is another channeled book called A Course in Miracles, which was apparently written by some woman who channeled it, and that woman was working in an office as a secretary for somebody in the fucking CIA in America. But it also gives a very mental description of all this stuff, and it doesn't really go into the whole feeling realm stuff of it. So it's a really mental version of all this stuff. But having eventually managed to read the whole text of that book over the space of a few years, I can't argue whether any of the logic of the book is correct. But in seeing how it's correct, I'm able to see that what it's describing is the same as what I know about the fairy faith regarding time, of how one can travel from outside of modern mortal time inside of mortal time, that there are other worlds in other timelines that are outside of the conception of time that we are living in the simulation of in this timeline, kind of thing. Which is why people think this is a prison planet and we're trapped inside in time and we're trapped inside in bodies and we keep on recycling in here. Although if you're a Christian in the normal sense of the word, you won't believe in reincarnation. You won't accept reincarnation. You think this is the only lifetime. And you won't particularly understand time or biology. And there is no mother of God. There's a mother of Jesus, but she's not the mother of God. There's a father of Jesus, but he's not God. Yeah, the Jesus story leaves a lot of stuff that the Jesus followers just don't understand, don't accept. So there's an awful lot of denial of feelings and denial of the mother and mother wound and mother hate and suppression of the feminine incarcerated in the beliefs of the Christian church, sorry to say, and inside in the Jewish church synagogue, sorry to say, and inside of the Mohammedesque church, sorry to say, and those three different religions, those three different combinations of sticks bundled together that men tally constructed a simulation of words which become belief systems, which become sword-carrying governmental control system empires, which essentially can be tracked back to the Phoenicians who invented language as a written word phenomena. And they created the simulation by which we now live in stories. Here I am in a room made of blocks, essentially like blocks are like Lego. I'm living in a Lego land. But here I am in this bedroom, and this bedroom is in the shape of a cube. You can see the corner of one of the 8 corners is in the background beside my ear here, kind of thing. There is a window on the world that's like the windows in your computer, that's your operating system. You can look through the Windows operating system to see what's outside, to see all the information, kind of thing. We generally have net curtains on our windows. The net is on the windows. The windows facilitates a necessity for a net, kind of thing. Why do these words happen to form analogies for what's going on with the computers? Why are the computers being able to form analogies to help us understand how we got into a body, how we embodied? So the Right Use and Will stories actually describes how the physical plane came into existence, how the emotional plane was pre-existent, how the mental plane is a light body of essentially light itself is a simulation of what if the mother had some company, what if there was a mirror for the mother in which to be able to reflect upon herself, to understand her feelings, or overstand her feelings, or externalize her feelings. So the darkness is before duality. Spirituality, regarding spirit being light, is actually spirit duality, if the light could acknowledge that there was darkness before light. But for those who believe only in the light because of the trickery of sight, that the only thing is real is what you can see, that feelings aren't as real as seeing, that everything that informs our mentality is, in a sense, dependent upon the sense of sight, because seeing is believing, and we live in a system of beliefs. In believe, there is a lie. It's not the whole truth, kind of thing. Yep. I'm going to finish now and come down. Bye, everybody.